configured, right? So go ahead and open your terminal. And we're going to create a directory for all of our project work. You can create a directory from the command line with mkdir, mkdir. Say what you want to call that, like XTBC. Make a directory for all your projects. Now that won't change you into that directory automatically. So once you make it, you're going to have to change in there, right? Wherever you are. So when it opens, it's probably your home directory. You can always tell by hitting pwd. I'm in users dstruce. You're probably in C:\users/username, right? So yep, you can mkdir, XTBC, put it wherever you want. Just make sure it's something that's easy to find later because you're going to be using it all the time. And then you still need to change into it. So cd XTBC. And then we're going to make a directory inside that for the project we're about to start, which we're going to call let's mkdir person stats. Person-stats. Change into it. Very important, that part. Because we're about to run a command that you don't want to run in the wrong directory. Did you not do the setup instructions?
I just don't have the terminal. I think it's
Git bash? The commands are different, so you're going to want to install a Unix thing. Did you install Git bash as part of the instructions? Okay, run Git bash. Or hyper if you installed that.
So why did Windows even say like their own command line? Why did they make it all different? That's my question.
I don't know. It was a long time ago. DOS was the late 70s. Unix was already around, but they wanted their own. Yeah. And they have another one called PowerShell. Yeah, cmd.exe is kind of a piece of crap, so. And we want everyone to be able to run the same commands. Yeah, if you installed Git bash as part of the setup instructions, run that. If you followed all the instructions and actually set up hyper to run Git bash, you can run that, and then you'll be running the same thing I am. One way or another, make a directory for this project, change into it, and then let's open up Visual Studio Code in this directory, which we can do by typing code space dot. So dot refers to the current directory you're in, whatever directory that happens to be. Code is the command line for launching Visual Studio Code. So code space dot would open up code in that directory so that there's nothing else in there. All kinds of friendly stuff here on our welcome page. We want to make an HTML page inside person stats. So I can click this little rascal for new file. And I'm going to call it index.html. Why index.html? If you have a web server that just returns files, you can ask for the directory that that file is in, and it'll look for an index.html and return that, so you don't have to type out the whole thing, for what it's worth. Now again, if you followed all the instructions, including installing some of these VS Code extensions, specifically HTML boilerplate, then you can get some nice placeholder HTML or an empty HTML by just typing HTML tab. And I get a whole HTML document. I'll copy and paste this for those who haven't installed it yet, but please install it. I'm going to get rid of these conditional comments which target old versions of Internet Explorer, because right now all they accomplish is making it harder to read. Okay, so this is basically an empty HTML document with just some common stuff in there. And I have pasted this into Slack. So our HTML document is divided basically into two parts, a head and a body. The head contains some metadata. The body will contain the actual document. But notice in the head there is a title, and the title is empty. Let's put a title in there. Like person stats. Pretty boring name. So go ahead and add that title. And let's see if we can open this in a browser. Once again, if you happen to follow all the instructions, there was a plugin for Visual Studio Code that you could add that lets you just hit Control F1 or Command F1 to open the current file in a browser directly. If you didn't do that thing, there's nothing on the page anyway, except a title, person stats. If you didn't do that, here's something else you could do. From the directory where we created it, on a Mac or other Unix type machine, you could type open space index.html, and I'm just going to type in tab to autocomplete that to make sure I'm in the right directory. I am. So I can hit open index.html, and that'll open it in the web browser. If you're on Windows, just use start instead of open. It'll open up in your default browser. And if your default browser isn't Chrome, you might want to change it to Chrome just for the duration of this class at least, because we want to use the dev tools. But if you don't have that, if Chrome isn't your default, here's something else you could do. In Visual Studio Code, find the file, right-click it, and say in a Mac, Reveal in Finder. In Windows, I think that would be Reveal in Explorer. And we'll actually open up the folder that contains it. And then you could right-click it and say, Open with Chrome. So lots of ways to get to that file. But become comfortable with that process of being able to open the darn thing we're using. And let's at least put a little something in our body so that we can see something in the browser and make sure this is all working. Let's put an H1. Opening tag, closing tag, and in between, let's put person stats. Refresh the page. Yay! My H1. It's so beautiful. Now, we have something that works right now. And maybe we're going to screw things up so bad that we'll never get back to a working state again as long as we live. So we should probably put this in version control right now. Who's used Git before? Who's used some other form of version control, like Subversion, Team Foundation Server, anything? So who's never used any kind of source code management or version control? Okay, several people. So we're going to be using Git in this class. It's pretty dang popular now. We're going to go over in more detail what's special about Git. But for right now, just know that we're able to save different versions of our project in our history so that we can go back to a working state if we should screw something up. Also, it gives us a handy opportunity to explain what we were doing at each step. So we're going to do that thing. So, in your terminal, in the directory where your project lives, make sure you are in that directory. Hit PWD if you're not sure. Print working directory. Yes, I'm in person stats. Hooray. type git space init. And you should see initialized empty Git repository. Notice it tells us it did so in a .git subfolder. You don't need to do this, but real quick, I'm going to open that folder. On Unix machines, including Macs, that folder will be hidden. Preceding the name of anything with a dot hides it. In Windows, it won't be hidden. But let's open it in Finder so I can actually take a look at it. So open.git. Here we go. What do I have? Okay. I have a file called head, one called description, one called config, and I have 4 folders. It just said it was an empty Git repository. Even an empty repository has some stuff in it. So we never need to worry about the contents of this thing. Git is just going to keep track of it magically, and every time we add something new to our history, it's going to get stored there. So our Git repository will contain every version we've ever had, all of the changes we've made over time. So we can always rewind to get back to that. Yeah, Roy.
So for Windows, do we write something else up than open?
Are you using Git bash? Oh, start, right. Start instead of open. If you want to, yeah. You don't need to necessarily do that, because I'm just showing what's in there. But we can treat it as hidden and not worry about it. Just wanted to make the point that it is doing something. And now that this is an empty Git repository, I have some commands that are available, like git status on branch master. Neat, whatever that means. Initial commit. Untracked files. Index.html. Nothing added to commit, but untracked files present. Use git add to track. I suppose we could track index.html, huh? Or it's not going to do us much good to have a source code management system. So here's what we'll do. Git add index.html. And again, you can use tab completion to make sure you don't mistype the name of the file. I'm going to write one more command, but you don't need to do this. Oops. Forget I ever did that. Git add index.html. Very good, very good. So now if I write git status, still says initial commit, and then it says changes to be committed. And this is in green instead of red. Before it was untracked. So as soon as I run add on that thing, Git knows about it. This is now a file that it's interested in. But we haven't written anything to our history permanently just yet. It's in our history now. It's totally in that .git directory somewhere. But we have no way to refer to it to get back to this version because we haven't labeled this version yet. For that, we need another command, commit. So git add tells Git to start tracking this file or the changes that I've made to the file. Git commit labels this point in history. So git commit -m for message. We always want a message with our commits. Put it in double quotes. And I'm just going to say initial commit. And you should see something like this. One file changed, 14 insertions, create mode, blah, 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 index.html, something like that. Now if we type git status, on branch master for you, nothing to commit, working tree clean. In other words, no changes have been made since the last commit. If we type git log, we can see all our previous history. So it shows me initial commit, and this commit has a label, this big, long, nasty thing. And it has a message, and it has an author. Hopefully it says you and your email address there. If it doesn't, you may have skipped a step in setup. To get out of this, then hit Q. Get back to the command line. More about what all these steps mean tomorrow. But now we know if we make a change, we can commit it that way. So your entire history, all your commits, live on your machine. You have an entire repository. You don't need a server. But if anyone else wants to be able to see it, you should probably sync with a repository on another machine, like a server. So to do that, you can add a remote to your repository. A remote is just another computer also running Git that has a copy of this repository. So it would be really cool if our remote could be GitHub. Because you all have GitHub accounts now, right? Let's do it. Go to your GitHub account. And in the upper right, next to your avatar, you'll see the plus button here, create new. We want to create a new repository. Repository name, how about person stats? It doesn't actually have to match what you called it on your file system, but you might drive yourself crazy if you don't name it the same thing. So name it the same thing. And it has a few more options. We're not going to use any of these. Public is fine. This is open source. Don't initialize it with a README because we've already made some commits locally, and that'll just mess us up. Don't add any of this stuff. Just hit Create Repository. And it's going to print out an overwhelming amount of stuff. It has instructions for creating a new repository on the command line. We already did that. Or push an existing repository from the command line. We have an existing repository on our laptops already, right? So what we want to do is keep it in sync with GitHub. I said we can add a remote, which could be any other machine that's also running Git and should have a copy of this repository. So we run git remote add. And then we name our remote. You can name it anything. The most common by far is origin. And then you just need to give it the address of that. And here it is. Yours, if you see git at something, who sees that as opposed to HTTPS? Who sees git at instead of HTTPS? Everyone sees HTTPS? Okay. Well, on this Wi-Fi network, you're going to have to use HTTPS, so that's good. So that would add the remote so that our local copy knows about it. And then git push is the command to actually take the code we have and push it there. So on the right side here, notice the copy button. Go ahead and use that. Use the copy to clipboard button and run those two commands. You don't have to think too hard about what they actually mean right now. But the first one tells it about GitHub. The second one actually takes what we've written and pushes it up there. I'm going to change this command slightly, but you don't need to do that. And you should see something like this. Branch blah 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 set up to track remote branch blah 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 from origin. To prove it, go back to this page on GitHub and just hit refresh. And now you should see this. This is your repository. You see your file here. And up here you see one commit. And if you click on one commit, you'll see initial commit 5 minutes ago. So it's there, and it's there with all of the history. So let's make more changes and see how we can keep that in sync. And tomorrow we will break down a little more how all of this stuff works. Okay. Let's add a button. We like buttons. Button. update heading. And we want some JavaScript to make this do something. So let's add a second file here. You could write JavaScript right in HTML with a script tag, but we're not going to do that. Create a new file inside this same folder, and we'll just call it index.js instead of HTML. And back in the HTML file, we're going to need to link to that script. So underneath the button, inside the body, make a script tag. And the opening script tag is going to have an attribute called source, src, that needs to point to that script file. So we'll say source equals index.js. And just to prove that this much worked, over in my script file, I'm just going to put console.log. It worked. Over here in our beautiful person stats page, I'm going to open up my developer tools because I'm developing right now, so I always want my developer tools open. It'll be the first to let us know if there's an error. So Alt-Command-J or Shift-Control-J on Windows. That'll open your developer tools and make sure that the console tab is highlighted. And now we've made a change, so I'm going to refresh the page. And I hope the button will show up, and I hope that console log will be there. There's the button. There's the console log. It worked. Yeah.
Going back to creating the JavaScript, how did you do that with the Explorer?
Yeah, so this Explorer over here on the left, it has your tree here. I just hit the little plus thing here, new file. Just type in the name. That will only be there when you actually move your mouse over there. Yeah. Did you hit refresh?
Yeah.
Did you save? So if you didn't save in VS Code, there should be a dot up here, like a blue dot. If you're not used to the keyboard shortcut for save, which is Control-S or Command-S, get used to it because it's a lot faster than hunting it down with your mouse, right? So why did I bother putting that console log in there? I don't want to write a whole bunch of JavaScript, and then when it doesn't work, the whole problem was I screwed up my script tag. So I just want to check right off the bat that that much worked. I did link it correctly. But that's a pretty boring script. So let's go ahead and make it actually change the text of the H1. Why not? So we'll make a function called update heading. And inside that function, we'll grab the heading, which we know how to do, document.querySelector. Pass it the string H1. That ought to do it. Save that to a variable. And we'll just say heading.textContent equals, I don't know, ye old person stats? Just something. And we want that function to run when we click the button. So let's find the button. Const btn equals document.querySelector the string button. btn dot add event listener. Add event listener first needs to know what event it's listening to, right? This part. When what happens? When click happens. When click happens, do what? Update heading. We're just passing update heading in like it's a variable, because it effectively is. Does it work? Let's find out. Refresh the page. Clickety clickety. Ye old person stats. Yay, we did it. We did it in a real document. All right, that's super boring, yeah.
Something super small. I noticed no semicolons. It's not necessary.
Good question. Where the heck are the semicolons? I promised curly braces and semicolons. I see curly braces. Where the heck are my semicolons? So they've always been optional. They call this feature ASI, or automatic semicolon insertion. So if you leave them out, it'll effectively put them in certain places for you. And most of the time, with very few exceptions, it does it where you would expect. Now, for a long time, people said always use the semicolons anyway, because if you ran it through any processing tools to, say, minify it, remove all the white space, make it take up as little room as possible before it's sent to the browser, it would not figure it out.
Is that still the case?
That is no longer the case. Most preprocessors now actually handle the absence of semicolons just fine. So as of ES6, it's not really necessary anymore. So we're not going to do it, because we're going to be using React, and most React developers don't. So they're optional, and we're just not going to use them because we live on the edge. So our button works. Buttons are boring. How about a form? All right, back in our HTML, I'm going to get rid of this button. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a form. Easy enough, just a form element. And inside the form, I'm going to make a paragraph. And inside that paragraph, I'm going to put an input. Inputs do not have closing tags. They are empty elements. But we need some attributes. Input type equals text. So it's a text box. And name equals, let's call it person name, camel cased. Let's add a label for this input. So,
You said input doesn't need a closing tag.
right, in fact, it can't take one, right. It is an empty element. It has no contents. Let's make a label. Labels do have contents. And let's put just the word name in between the opening and closing tags. Now, how does it know what this is the label for? It doesn't yet. So label has an attribute called for. And we can put the name of the input in there, person name. What difference does it make what it's for? It doesn't change the way it appears. But for people using assistive technology like screen readers, putting that in helps, because it actually associates that label with the input, not just happens to live next to it. It's actually associated with it. So when they tab into that input, it'll tell it the label. So it's a good idea. Let's save that and have a look. Yay. Oh, man. Yeah, our event listener's now listening for a button that isn't there, but that's okay. I am underneath this going to add a button. But this time it's not just any old button. This button has a type of submit. Because it's going to submit this form, whatever that means. I'll say go inside the button. Refresh. Beautiful. Beautiful. Our event listener works again. Oh, wait, what happened? Watch. Watch closely. When I click the button, I saw the H1 change, and then it did this. What? Well, we submitted the form. It's a submit button now, and it actually submitted. So a form will submit. It has an attribute called action that you can put the URL of the page it's submitting to. If that's gone, it's just going to submit to itself. But the point is it is going to refresh the whole darn page. So we're going to have to do something a little different. Let's go ahead and give this form an ID of person-form. What we're listening for right now is a button being clicked. But someone asked a while back, what if you hit enter? When you're typing something into a form especially, you don't want to take your fingers off the keyboard and click a button. You want to hit enter, right? Clicking the button will submit the form, but so will pressing enter when one of the form fields is highlighted. So the event we want to listen for this time is not the clicking of the button. It's the submission of the form. Clicking the button will achieve that, but so will pressing enter. So we don't want to listen for the click. We want to listen for the form to be submitted. So when what happens? When a form is submitted. So let's grab the form. Const person form camel cased equals document dot query selector. It was an ID, right? Hash person dash form, I called it. So the selector identifies that thing by ID. And then I save it to a variable, and I follow JavaScript naming rules for variables. And then I can listen for an event on the form itself. Person form dot add event listener. What's the event? What's the when what happens part? When submit happens. Do what? Let's update heading. Just treat the function like it's a variable. Pass it in like that. No parentheses. We're not running it. It's running it for us. So save that. Refresh the page. Uh-oh. I have a stray. I hit a button. I was trying to hit escape. Blah, 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 hit enter. It changed again, but it still submitted. So when you add an event listener, if you do it this way or by saying dot on submit or whatever, doesn't matter. That doesn't stop whatever usually happens when that event occurs from occurring. What happens when you submit a form? Well, whatever we said, and it's going to submit the darn form. We haven't stopped it from doing that. You may remember, we can pass the event in as an argument. In fact, it's always going to pass it in as an argument. So if we put EV up here in the parentheses on update heading, we can access that event object. And let's just have a look at what that event object is like. So inside update heading, I'm going to write debugger, which is going to act as a breakpoint. We use breakpoints in other languages. When it executes and it reaches that line, it's going to stop right inside the browser so that we can mess with stuff. So now I have a debugger as the first line of update heading, so I can mess with it. So let's refresh to get our changes. Let's submit the form. Yay, paused in debugger. And we can look at stuff like all our local variables. We have EV, we have heading, and we have this. This. Believe me, you don't want to know, but you're going to have to know later. What all I want to do is flip over to the console. I should have this EV variable now, right? I'm inside update heading. There it is. It's an event. Target is the form. Current target, still the form. What else do we have? EV dot, oh my gosh, all kinds of stuff. Holy smokes. Yeah.
Is there a difference between target and current target?
Yes. And sooner or later, we will absolutely have to know. I'll tell you, if this is too much information, just ignore this for now, but I'll go ahead and answer the question. Target is the object on which the event occurred. So in the case of a click, it's the thing that you clicked. Current target is the thing for which you were listening for the event to occur. It's not always the same thing. So for example, if you have a button, and inside the button you have an image. Well, if you click on that image, you're still clicking on the button. But what happens is it'll check first whether the image has any event listeners. Failing that, it'll look up the hierarchy. Okay, well, did the button? Yes, the button did. And then it'll fire your event listener. And the target will be the thing that you actually clicked, the most specific thing that you clicked, so the image. Current target will be the button. Current target will be the thing you were actually listening for. So that'll be less confusing in a couple days, and we'll have to use it. But current target is usually what you actually want. But we're going to pretend it doesn't exist. All right, so event has a whole bunch of stuff on it. Among other things, it has a function called prevent default. And that will do just what it sounds like. Whatever the default behavior is for this event, stop it from happening. We don't want the form to submit. So we'll run prevent default. I can unpause my debugger here by clicking this. And now it changed it and didn't refresh the page. So back here, where we had a breakpoint, let's just write ev.prevent default. Open close parens. We're actually running this function. We don't want the default behavior to happen. Cool. Now we're still hard coding this text. But we have a lovely form field right here. Why not put whatever is in the form field in the text of the H1? Sound good? So how can we do that? What do you suppose the event target is? It's not the button anymore, right? It's the form. That's what was submitted, right? So event.target would be the form. So let's have a look at that. Let's say const f equals event.target. And heck, let's just throw a debugger in there again. If you're not sure how something works, throw a breakpoint in, check it out in the console, see what you can see about it. So now I want to see what this f is. Refresh the page. Let's type something in here. Submit. Okay, I paused. Flip back over to the console. And I should have a local variable f now. So now f is the form. And we have f dot all kinds of stuff. Ooh, f dot elements. I wonder what that is. Huh. It's an array-looking thing with a length of 2, and at 0 is the input. And at the 1 index is the button. So it looks like f.elements square bracket 0 would be the input. But that requires me to know what order they're in, sort of. Or I could loop over them. But we happen to give our input a name of person name. So our form also will just have a property called person name. f.person name is the input. So giving it a name actually helped us. Makes it really easy to get to it from the form. So the form will have a property for each of its inputs as long as you gave that input a name. Cool. So what if we take out our debugger? Let's say const name equals f dot person name. And then we say heading text content equals, instead of this hard-coded string, name. How's that sound? Do just what we want? Let's check it out. Refresh. Typity typity. Yay! Our H1 turned to object HTML input element. Oh. Not what we typed. Why? Because f.personname is not the value of the input, it's the input itself, which isn't a string. But if you try to set the text content to an HTML element, it's just going to run to string on that, which in the case of this turns it into this lovely thing. If you want what was actually typed in there, I heard a lot of people saying text content. But the thing about an input is there's no closing tag. There is no content. Instead, there's a value. So you could say name.value. Or you could say const name equals f.personname.value. If I were going to store the actual input in here, I'd probably name it name field or something, so I knew it wasn't the actual name. It was just the input. But I could just say f.personname.value, and then my name variable should hold what was actually typed in there. Refresh the page one more time. Tappity tappity. Yay! Kasidfugnift disjudfusug. We did it! We got something out of a form input and put it somewhere else on the page. Go us. Well, let's do something slightly more interesting. After the form, I'm going to put a div. Anybody know what a div is? It doesn't mean anything. It's just a generic element with no particular semantic meaning attached to it. Which is kind of what we want here. It's just a container. So let's make a div. Let's give it an ID of stats. This is where our person's stats are going to go. And we could make it so that when we submit the form, instead of changing the H1, let's put it in there. I'll show you one more trick real quick. We'll just leave that there, not do anything with it just yet. What if I type so strong, cool. I put an HTML tag in there. Darn. So since I set text content, it assumes that I wanted the exact text I entered there. If we wanted to change the HTML content, then instead of text content, we could use enter all caps HTML. So let's refresh the page. Let's try that again. So strong, refreshing, close strong, go. Well, it was already bold. Let's change it to EM for emphasis, which should italicize it. Hey, it works. So enter HTML instead of text content. We'll actually change the contents of this thing, but it'll allow you to actually put some HTML in there. So that's another thing you can do. Just FYI. I'm going to put heading.text content equals name, and I'm going to comment out this version, but I'll leave it in there. Neato. But we said we wanted to update this div instead. Well, sorry folks, we're out of time. I guess you're just going to have to do it. But first, let's commit our work. So back here, we need to add, commit, and push. Add tells Git about our changes. Commit actually labels that point in history. Push syncs it with GitHub. So git add, I don't want to list every individual file. I just want to say dot for the current directory. So let's just add everything in the current directory. Now if I do a git status just to see what's up, I should see changes to be committed, both of these files. Yay. Git commit -m, and I want to write a good descriptive commit message that says what we did. I'm going to write it as an imperative sentence, so a command. That way it'll kind of read back, this commit will, and then what I write here. So update the heading with input text. Seems legit. Update the heading with input text. I've got a commit. Now this still only lives on my laptop, but if I type git push, I see a bunch of stuff, and if I go out to GitHub and I refresh, now index.js is there, and I see 2 commits instead of 1.